Hi, this is Remembering the Past, the show where we talk about people who've died recently who've had a profound effect on our history, our society, or our culture. And in our ongoing series on Medal of Honor winners, tonight we're going to honor Navy Lieutenant Thomas Hudner Jr. Lieutenant Hudner was the first person to win the Medal of Honor in the Korean War. He was presented with the Medal of Honor by President Truman on April 13, 1951. He was a Navy pilot, and he won his Medal of Honor for his actions during the Battle of the Chosin Reservoir during December of 1950. We talked about the Battle of the Chosin Reservoir before. At the beginning of the Korean War, United Nations forces had driven deep into North Korea and had pressed a military advantage when thousands of Chinese troops secretly landed in North Korea, pushed the United Nations forces back, and surrounded them. Facing imminent destruction, United Nations forces were forced to retreat back to the Chosin Reservoir, and it was largely through the actions of American forces that the United Nations troops were saved, broke out of the encirclement, and created a new front line during the war. As we've also talked about several times, the Battle of the Chosin Reservoir in the winter of 1950 was known for the severe conditions and the extremely cold weather. Lieutenant Hudner's Medal of Honor citation reads as follows: "For conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life above and beyond the call of duty as a pilot in Fighter Squadron 32 while attempting to rescue a squadron mate whose plane, struck by anti-aircraft fire and trailing smoke, was forced down behind enemy lines. Quickly maneuvering to circle the downed pilot and protect him from enemy troops infesting the area, Lieutenant J.G. Hudner risked his life to save the injured flyer who was trapped alive in the burning wreckage. Fully aware of the extreme danger in landing on the rough, mountainous terrain and the scant hope of escape or survival in sub-zero temperature, he put his plane down skillfully in a deliberate wheels-up landing in the presence of enemy troops. With his bare hands, he packed the fuselage with snow to keep the flames away from the pilot and struggled to pull him free. Unsuccessful in this, he returned to his crashed aircraft and radioed other airborne planes, requesting that a helicopter be dispatched with an axe and fire extinguisher. He then remained on the spot despite the continuing danger from enemy action and, with the assistance of the rescue pilot, renewed a desperate but unavailing battle against time, cold, and flames. Lieutenant J.G. Hudner's exceptionally valiant action and selfless devotion to his shipmate sustain and enhance the highest tradition of the U.S. Naval Service." What made Lieutenant Hudner's efforts even more remarkable was the man he was trying to save was Ensign Jesse Brown, the Navy's first black aviator. In July of 1948, President Truman had issued Executive Order 9981, which abolished racial discrimination in the United States Armed Forces and eventually led to the end of segregation in the services. But it was still uncertain to what degree white soldiers would risk their lives to save their black counterparts, and Lieutenant Hudner's efforts at the Chosin Reservoir answered those questions in no uncertain terms. I should point out as a matter of trivia that one of our veterans' hospitals here in Chicago is the Jesse Brown VA, and I never knew who Jesse Brown was before researching Lieutenant Hudner's Medal of Honor. He shook Ensign Brown's wife's hand at the Medal of Honor ceremony at the White House in 1951, which was a big deal at the time, and in 2013 he returned to North Korea in an unsuccessful attempt to locate Ensign Brown's remains. They had been incinerated by American forces so as not to be captured and desecrated by the nearby Chinese. Here is a description of the shoot-down of Ensign Brown, who was a sharecropper's son, and the subsequent rescue attempt by Lieutenant Hudner.
Near the end of November of 1950, we had soldiers and Marines on the ground who were driving up in the vicinity of the Chosen Reservoir, headed on up towards the Yalu River, which is the dividing line between Manchuria and North Korea. Chinese were pouring across the Yalu River in great numbers and were attacking our troops and surrounding them, and they needed help desperately.
On December 4th, 1950, as Chinese forces stormed American troop positions along North Korea's Yalu River, 26-year-old Thomas Hudner was one of a flight of 6 fighters taking part in an armed reconnaissance mission in support of the embattled Marines on the ground. Flying alongside Hudner was 24-year-old Jesse Leroy Brown, a squadron veteran and the Navy's first African-American aviator. The the routine mission would soon become anything but, and the two friends would find themselves struggling to survive on an icy mountainside deep within enemy territory.
We were flying above the mountains. The map showed that the terrain in this area would be as high as 6,000 feet. The flight was going on with nothing unusual. Jesse called to us that he was losing power. We noted for Jesse, who was concentrating on flying his airplane, a clear spot in which he could land on the side of a mountain. Now, it isn't like flying directly into Mount Vesuvius, but it was the mountainous terrain leading up to higher elevation. And he was able to land in a field that appeared clear, but he had no power. And when he hit the ground, he hit with such force that the aircraft buckled at the fuselage. The fuselage buckled at the cockpit. And because of the condition of his airplane, the amount of snow and debris that he thrust up in the landing, there's no question in the minds of any of us but that he perished in that landing. The flight leader left the scene of the crash to improve radio communications with the Marines who were operating about 20 or 30 miles away to see if they had a helicopter who could come up and help us out. While the flight leader was gone, we saw that there was smoke coming out from under the cowling of the fuselage, and yet Jesse didn't move. He waved to us that he was alive, but he apparently made no effort to get out of the airplane. He just sat there. Smoke coming out from under the cowling of that airplane indicated there was a fire underneath. I was concerned that by the time the helicopter could arrive, and incidentally, our flight leader had gotten assurance that a helicopter would come down. But in the meantime, the time he took to get there, I was afraid the airplane would erupt into flame. So made the decision to make a wheels-up landing to save the life of a shipmate whom we'd come to love so dearly. My landing was all right. It was very hard, but my airplane was not mangled the way his was. When I got to the cockpit, Jesse saw me coming, and he was the epitome of calmness. About the only thing he said was, "Tom, we've got to figure out a way of getting out of here." With some difficulty, with snow on the soles of my boots, I climbed up on the wing and saw that he was trapped in the cockpit because of the way the fuselage was buckled. His knee was pinned in so that he couldn't move, and because of lack of traction on my part, I couldn't reach in to do anything to pull him out. Ran back to my aircraft and called the flight leader and asked him to have the helicopter bring up an axe and a fire extinguisher. Fortunately, the helicopter had not taken off yet. When he did appear, he had a small axe and a fire extinguisher, which did almost no good whatsoever. Fire extinguisher was extinguished in just a matter of moments, but the smoke had abated, so that fire was no longer a concern, but the axe did no good on the metal fuselage. Jesse, as I say, was the epitome of calmness the whole time, but he kept apparently lapsing off into unconsciousness, so he didn't talk very much. He responded to most of the comments that I made, but not all of them. But I tried to assure him that help was on the way and be just a matter of someone else helping me lift him out, get him in the helicopter and back to safety. Well, when the helicopter pilot, when he arrived, we saw how futile the effort was on our part to get him out of the plane, that he pulled me aside to tell me that he had to leave because it was getting dark, and helicopters in those days were not equipped to fly in any instrument or conditions of darkness, and that he was going to have to go, which left the decision with me as to whether to go with the helicopter or stay with Jesse, which I have to say would have been an act of suicide on my part. If the temperature, I didn't know exactly what condition he was in, but obviously he was not in very good shape. The coldness would have killed both him and me, so we left Jesse telling him we're going to go back and try to get some more equipment to help get him out of the airplane. And the only response he made was that if anything happens, he doesn't get out of there to tell his wife, Daisy, how much he loved her. The captain sent some aircraft in with napalm to destroy Jesse's plane and mine. With some difficulty, they found the wreckage of Jesse's airplane. Jesse was still in the same position he'd been in before, but they destroyed his airplane and mine with the napalm, and he was given a warrior's funeral under the circumstances.
Well, Lieutenant Hudner went to school with two presidents. He went to prep school at Phillips Andover with George H.W. Bush, and he went to the Naval Academy with Jimmy Carter. He also participated in the 2010 coin toss for the Army-Navy game. Here he gives his thoughts on patriotism.
Well, when I grew up, I think most of us were very conscious of what America was about. When I went through school, most of our classmates' parents had been in World War I, or a number of them had been in World War I. Among our studies, I went to prep school. Among our studies, great emphasis on history, and I've seen everybody has to have taken American history to graduate, and I had an appreciation of what the United States was all about and how fortunate we are to be American citizens. But I still didn't have full appreciation for it until later on, and especially the last few years, when I can see how dangerous the world is that we're living in, and how little sense of knowledge so many American citizens have about how much it cost us to be where we are today. I think that families should inculcate the spirit of patriotism in their children, and this should be passed down through generations. I think one of the things that bothers me most is that in academia, that there's not a great emphasis on what it means to be an American and how much it costs. And I also get upset about academia looking down so much on the military, which is a very honorable profession. That a lot of the things that we have done throughout our history may not have seemed to be the right thing to do at the time, but that we have been blessed to be part of the greatest country that has ever existed. No nation in this world has ever done anything more to eliminate discrimination, not only among other races, but discrimination among various elements of our society.
I'm going to close on that note. I want to thank my producer and IT genius, Sid Tepps, Lieutenant Hudner, and to you, Ensign Brown, who's been dead so many years now. Our gratitude is unlimited. We cannot begin to repay what you have done for our country.
Retrospect, it was almost a natural thing for guys in combat to do for shipmates and comrades. Had I been on the ground, I think I would have had enough faith in my shipmates for somebody to do something. And I felt that, yes, there was a chance that I wouldn't, but to save Jesse's life was worth it. And I do feel very strongly about our doing this for freedom, but the bottom line is that freedom doesn't mean nearly as much as spending a lot of time with these guys, especially under times of stress and everything. Guys will do anything for one another. Looking back, ever since I got the medal and seeing some of those people who are no longer with us, what they did, maybe there are 10 times as many people who should have gotten the medal. Maybe it's only twice as much, I don't know. But by God, we're not the only people who earned it. All these guys have stories. The music may be different, but it's all the same story.